Good afternoon. Welcome to our 26th meeting of this fiscal year. Hey, good to see you, Marilyn. At the beginning of each meeting, we like to spend 3 to 5 minutes meeting and greeting our fellow Rotarians and our guests, so please stand and visit with them. And then when I come back, we will remain standing for the invocation. All right, if everybody would return to their seats and remain standing, past President Fred Brown will lead us in invocation, pledge, and national anthem. Yes, this is the time when we go back to our places, please. Fred Brown to the stage, please. Oh, I forgot to ring the bell to start the meeting. You want to do it for me? Sure. That'll get them.
Yeah. How about a substitute bell ringer up here? Good morning, everybody. Past President Cleve Clinton was supposed to be here this morning, and he had no, he's not late. He's not late for the. Okay. He is not late today. He had a little surgery. I call it a little surgery. He calls it a major surgery, I'm sure. But he had a deviated septum surgery on Tuesday, and is still recovering from that, but he's doing well. So we'll keep him in our prayers as well today. We had a couple of things that went out from Lori this week that are worthy of mentioning again. And the first one is that Dennis Davenport's son, Nick, passed away on January the 26th. And Dennis, as many of you know, has been a member of this club for a long time, over 20 years. But we want to send condolences to Dennis and his family on the death of his son. Also, past President Eric Heitkamp's father, Robert Frederick Heitkamp, who passed away on January the 3rd. They'll have a memorial service for him on Friday, February the 17th. That's next Friday, at 1 p.m. at White's Chapel Methodist Church in Southlake. So keep that in mind. One other thing before we get started, I have a good friend who is, as we speak, in surgery at MD Anderson, and she is very serious, and we want to keep her in our prayers today as well. Are there other concerns from our group? Yes. Yeah. For recovery, right? Sure. Well, we'll keep both of them, your mother and your dad, in our prayers today. Thank you for sharing that. Others, Tom?
Bill Sleeper called yesterday, and he sounded much stronger. He still got a bad dry cough. He was healthy enough that we did some good-natured Rotary ribbing on each other. So that's how you know he's coming back around strong. So hopefully he'll be here in the next 2 weeks.
That's about Bill Sleeper. If you didn't hear that, he's recovering. He's been ill for some time here, so we'll keep him in our prayers. Others? Any others out there? If you would, too, keep in mind we have a card out in front for Dennis Davenport. If you would really please sign that before you leave today. So if you would bow your heads, we'll join together in prayer. As we gather today as members of the Rotary Club of Park Cities, we pray that we are ever mindful of opportunities to render our service to our fellow citizens and to our community. Accept our thanks for this day and all the blessings that come with it, its opportunities and its challenges. Guide and direct our club, its leaders, and our actions. Grant that each of us may feel our responsibility to Rotary, to our community, and to our country. May each of us in our daily routine come to know the joy of caring and sharing with others, not as fortunate as we are. Let us continue to strive to make a better world. Today we ask a special blessing for our shared concerns and for those mindful thoughts that are in our hearts but are not spoken today. Bless our fellowship today and bless the food prepared for us to the nourishment of our bodies and us to your service. It is in your holy name we pray. Amen. And if you'd put your right hand over your heart and say the pledge with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now our national
Anthem.
right, it's that time to share things that we might be happy about. I'll start it off. So last week I was in Florida, and I got to see my mom and dad and my sisters. And my mom has Lewy body dementia, which is not a fun thing. And the time before, when I saw her in September, apparently she was taking some anti-seizure medication, and they later realized that she shouldn't be on it, and she's improved quite a bit since. And so I'm very happy that she's still with us and cognizant, and I'm happy I got to see him.
Oh, it is. Okay. Happy for my Texas Tech Red Raider, Patrick Mahomes, who is voted MVP last night. Put in a shameless plug for Vista Bank. His uncle has now joined the Vista Bank board, Bill Mahomes. He was the first black recruit to graduate from the Corps down at A&M. So we're after the Aggie business, too, as well as the Texas Tech business. But anyway, happy for that. Thank you.
Well, I'm happy to be in the buffet line back at MAGGIANO'S. Did you ever believe we'd think that? Hats off to Lori and Jeff, and happy for pivoting 3 weeks in a row, finding some place for us to land.
Yep. Exactly. 10-4. Anybody else?
Any other happy news anybody wants to share? All right. Having none, it's that time when we'd like to introduce our guests. So if you're a guest, please rise and be introduced by a fellow Rotarian.
Mary, you it? Okay. I'm coming.
I'm Mary Bishop. This is my guest, Julie Gilbert. She's a real estate in residential. And you're with which company?
Briggs Freeman Sotheby's.
And how many of you have played pickleball?
Have, yeah.
How many of you really love pickleball? Oh, okay. That's how I met Julie. It's been a fun run, and whenever I play with her, we win. So that tells you how good a pickleball player, or how poor I am.
She's the one to have on your team. Rod?
Some of you may think I'm a visitor, but this is my wife, Beth, and my driver, and my meal planner. My name is Rodney Pirtle. For those of you, I only see about 3 of you who've been here long enough to know who I am. Anyway, glad to be here.
Thank you, Rod.
And I'm going to introduce Jason. I just met him, Jason Graves. Jason is visiting for the very first time today. And so I think Val may have introduced him to this club. Welcome, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm a pharmacist. I'm not actively practicing, but I have owned and operated quite a few pharmacies in the area.
Welcome, yes.
Back in the corner. You back in the corner. Oh. Greg Pape, you're on deck.
Eric Harrison invited Barbara Tunstall, who is the VP of Marketing for Come For Care.
Yes.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Any other guests?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me, and I hope to enjoy the meeting and the speaker as much as you.
Thank you.
Thanks to all the guests for being here. Yes, Rod?
You forgot.
Takes a while. I've been Zooming all the meetings, so I'm keeping up with you, but haven't been coming. Today, my wife says, I want to go to Rotary. She's enjoying it as much as I am. So,
all right, thanks for being here. Next up, Past President Greg Pape to tell us about the foundation.
Thank you, President Jeff. Just a little update on the Rotary International Foundation, providing humanitarian educational programs and the eradication of polio. 58 contributors thus far, year to date. We started July 1 this fiscal year, 58. But we have 152 members. That leaves 94 that haven't had an opportunity to contribute. Remember Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid? Remember the theme song? Who are those people? Well, we want to know who those 94 people are, because we want to sit down together, break bread, and explain all the wonderful things that Rotary does throughout the world in over 200 countries. And let's remind ourselves of the 7 areas of focus that global district grants are earmarked for. Rod, I know you know this. Take action to protect the environment, peace building and conflict prevention, disease prevention and treatment, which includes but not limited to the global eradication of polio, water sanitation and hygiene. The acronym for that, Tom, is WASH, which was formed in 2007 from some very wonderfully active, energetic Rotarians, not in our district, but this is the benefit of the diversity of Rotary. But in 2007, a group of Rotarians recognized by Rotary International focused on water and sanitation. Many Rotary clubs have international projects now that deliver clean water, sanitation, and hygiene to communities throughout the world. Maternal and child health, another area of focus. Basic education and literacy, and community economic development. The Rotary Foundation is the backbone of Rotary, and without revenue coming in from us, every Rotarian every year, $100, or every Rotarian that puts in $1,000 every year is a Paul Harris Society member. And it would do justice just for me to mention the 16 people in our club that do that, because that brings in $16,000. And that is past District Governor Rick Amesbury, Charlie Bond, past District Governor C.C. Colley, Nolan Duck, Karen Ferris, Doug Gill, past District Governor Richard Gilman, his wife Roselle, Tracy Gomes, John Glancy, Susan Harris, Doug Means, myself, Richard Stanford, Tom Swift, and Lynn Searles. Quite a stout group, 16 Paul Harris Society members. Yes?
Last time you saw Charlie Bond.
Last night.
And his wife?
You're pretty good. Yes. So, the Rotary Foundation finds a number of ways to promote, by example, its foundation. And today we're going to recognize Cindy Cummings, if she'll come up to the podium. She's been a member since 2010. And she's always armed with her checkbook, brings her own pen, and signs up for her contributions. Hey, that was pretty good. Hey, I like the pen. Well, now you also have this. Here's a Rotary Foundation pin with 2 diamonds in it. And that makes, Cindy, that makes you a third level contributor. Congratulations. Stay up here. Stay right there. And then I'm going to ask Kathy Allred to come up. I know I saw her. And Marianne MacLeod. Has Marianne come? Oh, good. We have sent out notices. We've campaigned this hard. But just as Roger and Alice Friedline have done, and Karen Ferris and Happy Franklin, they use their foundation points to recognize other Rotarians or non-Rotarians with Paul Harris Fellow recognition. It's a wonderful thing to do to a family member, business associate, neighbor, and it promotes the foundation. And this is what Kathy Allred has done today by recognizing Marianne MacLeod with a Paul Harris Fellow recognition, the certificate from Rotary International, and the Rotary International pin.
I'll take that.
And now, oh, you're going to pin her?
I'm going to pin her.
Uh-oh.
Right now, right here and now, so that everybody knows.
Pretty awesome. I think we're going to get our picture taken. Maybe, maybe not.
I think he's already done it.
You already done it? I've already done it. You're good, John. You're good. Thank you. Thank you, President Jeff.
Next up is Patsy Watson for this week's Marketplace Advertiser, to be followed by Jill Jordan for a quick announcement.
Today's Marketplace Advertiser is Ryan Botsong. Maybe pronouncing that wrong. Ryan works at 49 Financial as a financial planner. 49 Financial is an independent financial services company, and Ryan primarily helps families with retirement planning, estate planning, and tax planning. Ryan loves the opportunity to sit with business owners, professionals, and families to discuss their specific goals and priorities and to build a relationship with them over time. Is Ryan here today by any chance? He is not. Well, let's give him a big thanks for advertising in our hub.
Okay, it's parade time again, and this time I'm putting you all to work. On your table are 2 stacks of papers related to the parade. The first one is dealing with voting on the theme for the year. So we had 18 different people respond to the call for throw out an idea for the parade theme. They came up with 53 different ideas. So given all that, I had a subcommittee cull it down to the top 16 that we thought. And what I'd like you to do is vote for what you think your top 2 are. Put a 1 by your first choice and a 2 by your second choice. If you'll do that sometime during the meeting, just leave it on the table. I'll pick it up when we leave. The second stack of paper is a call for volunteers to help with the pre-parade planning. It outlines all the tasks that need to be done. If you would like to volunteer, please sign your name, circle the one that you want to do. The third thing is, Cleve couldn't be here, but he is starting to solicit ideas for who the Grand Marshal should be. So please email him with who you think the Grand Marshal should be for this year. So that's your work for today. Just leave the papers on the table when you leave, and I'll pick them up. Thanks so much.
Okay, 4 weeks ago, I'm on my way home from this meeting, and I get a call from Lori Aldridge. And she says she just got a call from MAGGIANO'S. And MAGGIANO'S tells her, oh, by the way, you can't have the room for the next 3 weeks. That was the last 3 weeks. So we pivoted, and we were at Park City Club, and then we did a social at Campese, did a survey of everybody that went, and they had a great time. That was a good event. And then we were at Park City Club again. Last Friday, I land at the Tampa airport. My sister picks me up. I'm driving down the road. I get a text from Lori Aldridge saying, can you talk? So I call her. Oh, by the way, I got to back up a second. I did meet with, after all that happened with MAGGIANO'S, I met with Scott. He is the manager of this location. And he said, I am so sorry. I thought when I met with you and Happy last year, we had all of this taken care of. He said, I delegated it to somebody, thought they put it on the book so this wouldn't happen again. And that didn't happen, and he said, that's on me. He said, what happened is, in the past, he's always had a banquet manager on site, and now he's got 2 banquet managers, but they're regional. They're not based here. So if they look on the computer system, if nothing's reserved, they'll book a meeting. So that's why we didn't get those last 3 weeks. That's why March 3rd we can't be here, and May 5th we can't be here. And he said, oh, by the way, he said, we love Rotary. His dad is a past president in the Fresno, California Rotary Club. He said, I have cooked for many events that they have. He said, we love Rotary, and we want to make sure you guys are here. He said, my manager is another guy who has family relations in Rotary, and it's real important that you guys are here. I know I'd heard rumblings. A lot of people were thinking, well, maybe MAGGIANO'S doesn't want us. He said, that is absolutely not the case. So just know that we are wanted, and they messed up on their scheduling, and we've gotten it resolved. We are booked out till 2025. Okay? He only booked us to 2024, and I said, no, that ain't going to work because of their 2-year rolling rule. So we made a commitment that the incoming president and Lori will meet with him in the fall so that we can extend it on a year beyond that so that it's always on the schedule. So hopefully this problem will be eliminated going forward. Okay? Now, one other little piece. He said, oh, by the way, we're going to be doing a renovation. Bad news is, when they're doing a renovation, we can't be here. The good news is, when we come back, this will be a nice, improved place to have our meetings. So when Lori called me the other day, or I called her back, she said, well, we got the email, and we know that they're starting to do construction on February 23rd. So he originally told me it was going to take 4 weeks. He said, but the mall says we can only do work in the evenings, can't do it during the day or on weekends. So he said that 4 weeks might take 6. So what we are going to do, we talked about a lot of different venues. The one thing that we wanted to do is make sure that we have continuity wherever we go. The problem with a lot of places out there, they're going to be a lot more money, number one. Number two, a lot of places don't have AV systems and everything else. So we have scheduled the days to be at Park City Club beginning on March the 24th. And we will keep you apprised through community emails and so on and so forth. But just know they want us here. And when we do come back after this layoff, if you will, this should be a new and improved location. I said that. Oh, I'm sorry. My brain said February 24th. February 24th, so in 3 weeks. All right. It's that time of the day for drawing for a raffle. And our speaker, Mark, is going to, I'm sorry. That's right? Yeah, Mark Wynne is going to draw. Elsa, would you get him to draw? Where are we on that? It's been so long since we've done it. $433. And if you'll recall, if you draw the ace of spades, you'll get a draw card. And if you win, you get the ace of spades, you'll get half the pot. The other half will go to our foundation. This week's winner is, last 4 numbers are 7241. Woo, and I didn't get it. Come on up. Four of hearts. The money will roll forward. Val, if you'll come up and introduce our speaker. Thank you.
I really like getting, can you hear me? I really like getting the speakers from the Federal Reserve. I've been doing this for quite a while. So I used to practice the word econometrics for a week when I first started. Then I got better at it, and I started on Tuesday. Then I started on Wednesday. Well, you know our speaker. He's been here before. I hope your questions are as scintillating and as tough as they have been. And now I didn't practice econometrics because I know you all can say it better than I can. So welcome our speaker, Mark Wynne.
Well, thank you. It's good to be back. Before I start, I need to issue a standard disclaimer that everything I say is a personal opinion and not an official opinion of the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas or the Federal Reserve System. Okay? So let me just quickly go through, I don't know how familiar you are with the structure of the Fed, just give you two or three minutes on just what the Fed is, what we do. So the Federal Reserve System consists of the Board of Governors in Washington, D.C., and 12 regional Federal Reserve banks, one of which is here in Dallas. The regional banks are not branches of the Board of Governors in Washington. They're independent legal entities. We have branches in Houston, San Antonio, and El Paso. The mandate we have, which is given to us by the U.S. Congress in the 1977 legislation, mandates that we pursue maximum sustainable growth, maximum employment, stable prices, and moderate long-term interest rates. And that's usually interpreted as a dual mandate for maximum employment and price stability. The way these decisions are made on policy is through the Federal Open Market Committee, which is the key policy-making body in the Federal Reserve System. And it meets 8 times a year. There was just a meeting last week. The committee consists of the 7 governors in Washington and then 5 of the 12 Reserve Bank presidents. So even though there's 12 Reserve Banks around the country, only 5 of the presidents get to vote at each FOMC meeting. So the president of the Dallas Fed only gets to vote every 3 years. This year, President Logan, who's been with us for 6 months now, is a voting member of the committee, and then she'll rotate off and somebody else will rotate on. And the way the committee has defined its mandate for price stability is a rate of inflation of 2% as measured by the annual change in a particular price index, the deflator for personal consumer expenditures. Now, obviously, over the past 2 years, inflation has been running well in excess of 2%, and that is the single biggest challenge that the committee is dealing with at the moment and is fully committed to bring the problem down. When I last spoke to you back in January of last year, I talked about fundamental drivers of long-run prosperity, demographics, productivity growth, international trade. I may just quickly remind you of those things too. The outlook then was for continued global recovery in 22 and 23. Monetary policy was beginning to be tightened, and we greatly accelerated the pace of tightening of monetary policy over the course of this year. And then I talked a bit about the risks to the outlook, and at that time it still included COVID and the race of vaccines to get everybody vaccinated and sort of make the virus less of an issue. Debt, China slowdown, trade. And then I talked about black swans, and black swans are these events that can come along that you just don't ever anticipate. So 2 years ago, the big black swan we had to deal with was, of course, COVID. And that was a major factor in the deliberations of the Fed as it made monetary policy over the past couple of years, and it was featured prominently in a lot of the statements issued after each meeting. The black swan event this year, of course, or sorry, last year, was of course the Russia invasion of Ukraine. Even though at the time in January there was all rumblings that this was going to happen, I think many people were taken by surprise that it actually did happen at the end of February, and that it has lasted as long as it has. I mean, once it happened, I remember thinking myself, this is going to be over by the weekend. And we're now a year into this thing, and it has fundamentally changed trade relationships in Europe. It has impacted energy markets. It has just created a huge amount of uncertainty in the global economic outlook. And again, the committee routinely refers to this as a factor weighing on their decisions as they make monetary policy. So this is just a picture showing you the rate of growth of global economic activity going back to 1980. And there's projections then for the next couple of years. This is from the IMF's World Economic Outlook. You see pretty stable global growth over most of the time. A big slowdown associated with the financial crisis, a huge slowdown associated with COVID, a big bounce back, and then a pretty stable outlook going forward for the next couple of years. But this chart instead shows you the inflation rate. This is just inflation averaged for all of the advanced economies, the United States, Western Europe, Australia, Japan, and so on. And you see how this spike in 2021, 2022 has a big deviation from what we'd seen over most of the previous decades. The last time we had inflation anytime this high was back in the 1980s. So this has really been a big shock and surprise and a challenge for central banks. Not just in the United States, but this is an advanced economy phenomenon. And we're still dissecting the exact reasons for what went wrong, why things went wrong, why monetary policy didn't anticipate this. But it was not a mistake unique to the United States. It's happened in Europe, the United Kingdom, even in Japan to a certain measure. So this is just showing you projected growth rates, estimated growth rates for last year for the big advanced economies, and then a selection of the emerging market economies. I've only highlighted 2 red entries there. One is that the United Kingdom is the only major economy that's expected to contract this year, largely due to their very challenging economic situation, which has been in part exacerbated by disruptions associated with Brexit. But they were much more adversely hit by the Russian energy price shock than in many other countries in Europe. And then the only country to contract that's estimated to have contracted last year is Russia, but it's projected to actually grow slightly, about 0.5% this year going forward. So this is every 4 times a year when the Federal Open Market Committee meets, the committee members are asked to submit their projections for growth, inflation, and unemployment for the next several years. This is known as the Summary of Economic Projections, or SEP. So the last time they did this was back in at the December meeting. There will be another SEP issued after the March meeting. You see again the contraction in economic activity, the rapid bounce back last year. But this year the committee is projecting pretty low growth with only a gradual pickup towards long-run trend growth, which is about 1.8% for the U.S. economy, partly due to low productivity growth and low population growth. So we estimate that 1.8% is about the fastest the U.S. economy can grow on a sustainable basis without having inflation. The flip side of this is what's going to happen with unemployment. So unemployment has come down a lot since the highs we saw during the COVID pandemic, but the FOMC is projecting a modest uptick in unemployment over the next year or so, in part because of its efforts to slow the economy down, to make the labor market more balanced, to try to tamp down inflation and get inflation back to the 2% long-run objective. And this is where they see inflation going over the next couple of years, only gradually coming down to the 2% target over the next 4 years. The way this is going to be all engineered is by a pretty rapid increase in the federal funds rate. So the federal funds rate has increased, I think it was the fastest rate of increase in interest rates over the past year since the 1980s. Again, that was all due to the fact that inflation, which was initially assessed to be a temporary phenomenon, towards the end of 2021, it became pretty apparent this is not a temporary problem. This is something that's seeping through to the broader economy and needs to be reined in before it gets reflected in inflation expectations, and hence the urgency and speed with which the committee raised interest rates over the past year and are likely to do so going forward. So quickly stepping back from some of these things, last year I talked about these secular drivers of economic growth. These are things we don't often talk about, but really determine the environment in which we all live and operate. Demographics, productivity growth, and globalization. And quickly I'll skip through these things. I showed you these pictures last year about how economic activity is shifting from advanced to emerging market economies, how China may already be the world's biggest economy. If they're not, they're pretty close in size to the US. And here's the really interesting thing. I guess you may have seen this recently, the estimate that Chinese population growth is now negative. For a long time, the working age population of China has been shrinking. Now the total population is shrinking, in part a legacy of the one-child policy. But other factors that are now playing in are the cost of raising children in China and so on. But that's going to fundamentally change the dynamics of what goes on in Asia. If you go back to my previous slide where I had the growth rates, if you looked at all those numbers, in fact, India is now projected to grow faster than China, in part due to the fact that it still has a growing population and growing working age population. The big problem we're dealing with in the United States that we don't talk about enough is productivity growth. This is the rate at which we can increase the amount of stuff we can make with the existing number of people and stuff in this room, and it has not been growing fast enough despite all of the great innovations in technology we've seen over the past few years. But if we get productivity back to growth, back to the levels we saw in the late 1990s, it would go a long way towards solving a lot of our problems. And one of these problems is, of course, the big level of debt that is growing and keeps on growing. It's back in the news again as Congress and the administration debate whether to raise the debt ceiling. That's sort of an issue of some urgency, and hopefully that issue will be resolved sooner rather than later. It is not a problem that can be fixed by the Fed, and the Fed has been very clear about this. This is a problem that has to be fixed by the administration and Congress. So 3 questions for the outlook going forward that when we think about what's going on in the U.S. economy. Is inflation slowing? Inflation is still well above our 2% mandate, what we define as price stability. We see some signs that inflation is slowing, but we're nowhere near having the job done, and it's going to still take some time to get inflation back to target. Our supply and demand coming back into balance. Basically, this inflation problem is due to an imbalance between supply and demand. Demand has basically outstripped supply, pushing up prices. We need to restore a better balance between these 2 drivers of inflation. We're getting there, but they're still not all the way there yet. And then the last question is whether we can get all this done without a large increase in unemployment. And this is the so-called soft landing. Is it possible to cool the U.S. economy down by enough to get inflation back to 2% without spiking a large increase in unemployment? Historically, it has proven very difficult to do that because monetary policy is a very blunt tool, but there have been episodes where this has happened, and it's not impossible that it could happen again, but it will be a very challenging thing to pull off. I have a bunch of other slides that go into all the answers on these questions, but I'm not going to talk through all those slides. I'm going to actually stop here and take any questions you may have, assuming you have questions. So, yes, sir.
Congress to change their ways.
So again, this is not an issue that the Fed has any role, but so the large deficits do contribute to inflationary pressure, and they make it more challenging. The more debt you've accumulated, the harder it is. So it's not always a bad thing to issue debt, right? If you're fighting World War II, it was probably a good idea to borrow a ton of money to get that done, rather than tax at the levels you would have needed to have done to cover all the spending associated with the war. Likewise, COVID. I think we spent a lot of money during COVID because that was a once-in-a-century emergency. We were telling people they couldn't go to work, so it made sense to borrow money to smooth through that emergency. The thing is, what do you do during normal times when you're not in a war, you're not in an pandemic? And unfortunately, we seem to have lost the discipline of running surpluses to offset these occasional deficits that are actually justified by good economic policy. And it really is a matter of, people in Congress appreciating the urgency with which these things need to be addressed, because as the debt goes up, you have to spend more money just servicing that debt. So a bigger chunk of your tax revenues are going just to service debt as opposed to paying for stuff we might all want, like additional social benefits or additional military spending. So it just removes some of the scope for action you have the higher you let this number go. And then there's always the possibility at some point that the people who are lending to us will decide they don't want to lend to us anymore because they lose faith in our willingness to repay. And this is the big concern with the whole debt ceiling debate. I mean, if we ever were to default on our debt or not pay our bills, it would fundamentally alter the status of the U.S. dollar in the global financial system and U.S. Treasuries as the benchmark for all global financial markets. So it's a very urgent issue, but it really is a matter for Congress, for politicians to take this issue seriously. But I think we as voters, we're always happy to elect people who promise us lower taxes and more spending. So I think it ultimately comes back to the voters taking this seriously as a national issue. And unfortunately, it seems to have disappeared from national discourse as an important issue. You go back to the 1990s, there were people, senior serious people in Washington who felt things needed to be done to put the trajectory of debt on a more sustainable basis, and things actually were done. But over the past 20 years or so, we have not seen that level of interest in this issue, unfortunately.
Since this is your personal opinion and not the Fed, is it your sense that we will have a soft landing, that if we do have a recession, it'll be relatively mild, and that the unemployment rate will not skyrocket?
So one of the charts I haven't shown you is that it is very rare for the unemployment rate to go up by a little and not go up by a lot. Once unemployment starts going up, it typically goes up quite a bit. Part of the reason for that is that monetary policy is a very blunt instrument. You know, there's one thing, well, right now there's two things we control. There's the interest rate and then the size of the balance sheet. But the balance sheet thing is really a secondary background kind of thing. But that interest rate that we control, it's just a blunt instrument, and it can be hard to predict exactly how it's going to affect the broader economy. We know right now that the actions taken over the past year have impacted the housing market. We've seen a dramatic turnaround in the housing market. We're beginning to see some slowdown in manufacturing production. But predictions of an outright recession are actually receding somewhat. I mean, everybody was very surprised last Friday. We had a jobs report that said there was 500,000 new jobs created in January, and that was just, nobody expected that. Now, that's just 1 month, and that number can be revised down. It will be revised, but we don't know if it will be revised up or revised down. So we're not going to put too much weight on that, but the scenarios where people saw an outright contraction of the U.S. economy this year seem to have receded somewhat. They haven't gone away completely. So, I mean, all of that's to say, I mean, there's a possibility that we could have a soft landing, but it's historically very rare. And when we did the last one that I can remember was during the mid-1990s. It was 94, 95. But one of the things that happened back then is, I don't know if you remember, we also had a big uptick in productivity growth in the mid-1990s associated with the internet boom, Netscape first. I don't know if you guys remember Netscape, the first browser. Amazon was created. So a whole bunch of innovations occurred in information technology that helped raise productivity growth. And that's something that could happen this time around. We don't see any sign of it yet or hear any anecdotal evidence. But if something like that were to happen, it would certainly make this, you know, more optimistic scenario more likely. So I would have to say, you know, getting back to answer your question directly, I'd say historically it's unlikely we get through this without having some contraction of the economy and some increase in unemployment, but it's not impossible that we'll avoid it. So.
Okay. Yes, I have a question. Before the pandemic, you moderated, I believe it was an online meeting, and usually with the Dallas Fed chair, maybe with a guest, and I loved it, and then, of course, it stopped. Is it back on again? Can we look at that again, or what's the status?
Yeah, so that was, that whole program, I mean, I sort of managed that. That was Rob Kaplan's baby, if you will, and Rob was really good he was very comfortable with being on stage and interviewing these people, and he used a lot of his Rolodex to get people we would normally be paying $50,000 speaking fees to. They came and spoke on these things for free. I mean, it was great, I thought. I don't know that President Logan she has different priorities. I don't know if she'll want to revive this in some form, but as of now, I'm not aware of any plans to revive it, or if it would be brought back in a different form, maybe concentrating more on people from the district or something. So, but as of now, it's still, unfortunately. So when we also used to do it in person and have people come into the bank, and it was a great way to try to demystify the institution and just bring people in and show that, you know, we're just normal people like everybody else trying to do the best, you know, for the American people as mandated by Congress. Obviously that all stopped in the pandemic, but I think if we did revive it, it would certainly be an in-person thing, and I know our outreach people would love to bring it back, but it's ultimately going to be President Logan's call, and she's still only 6 months into the job, so.
I saw a number, it was somewhere in the 7 million number, I believe. It was men ages 25 to roughly 50, 52 that are out of the workforce or not participating. Can you speak to that at all?
Yes, so this is one of the great unspoken tragedies. I think the decline in, well, there's a whole bunch of problems associated with male young men and men more generally. Labor force participation of prime age males, and that's men between the ages of 25 and 54, has gone down by about 10 percentage points since the 1950s. It used to be close to 98%. If you're prime age, you're healthy, you're not getting benefits, you have to work. And that number has gone way, way down. It's now, I think, less than 80%. So a lot of men who otherwise would be working are just not participating in the labor force. The exact reason for that I don't think are terribly well understood. Part of it's due to the disappearance of very traditional male jobs, like manufacturing jobs, that you could do with very little education. So the other issue with young men is that they're increasingly failing. Men are not graduating from high school at the same rates as women are. They're not going to college or graduating from college at the same rates as women are now. And that's creating a serious social problem that will need to be addressed. But the exact reasons for this, I don't know that we know. Like I said, I think decline of manufacturing is part of it. The change in the structure of the economy. The rise of gaming. So apparently online I mean, I've never understood the attraction of online gaming, but my son, apparently, he's got a job though, but apparently a lot of young men just spend all their day gaming. I don't know what they live on. They either have a partner or live with their parents or something like that, but it is a real problem. That's 10%, that's like 7 million more people you could have in the workforce producing stuff, and that could then be used to pay for government programs, roads, whatever. We'd like to have more of. So I think it's a huge problem, one that's not spoken about often enough, but the exact reasons for it I think are still not terribly well understood.
Yes, sir. You said the desired inflation rate was 2%. What is it now?
So it depends which measure you look at. It's about 4.5% to 5%. So measures of consumer price inflation are currently running about 4.5% to 5%. I actually have a slide. I think it'll give you the exact number. So there's the I can't read that, but it's on the slide. It's about where are we? Yeah, 5.1. Yeah, so it's about at 5%. So it's still, that's twice what it should be. That's the headline number. Now, the headline number has come down in part because gas prices have fallen. So if you take out gas prices, the improvement is not as dramatic. So we're looking at measures of inflation that strip out food and energy prices, like so-called core measures. But there is some sense that things are certainly turning and that we're getting back, but we're nowhere close to where we need to be consistent with our mandate. I mean, you look at that picture, you see how close we were to 2% for so long until this recent episode. You have to go all the way back to the 1970s to see inflation rates this high. So there's a sense that it's turned. I'll tell you, our biggest concern, and this is something my boss talks about in her speeches, is the longer inflation stays above 2%, the greater the likelihood that people will think that that's the normal state of affairs, and they come to expect higher inflation. And once you come to expect higher inflation, you factor that into your wage demands, and employers become more willing to pay higher wages because they think they can charge higher prices, and you get this so-called wage price spiral going on. And what we really why we're acting with such alacrity is to get inflation back down before measures of expected inflation go up from 2%, because if they go up from 2%, it's going to be much, much harder to bring inflation down. And that's what Paul Volcker had to deal with in the early 1980s. And those of you who are old enough to remember, the early 1980s recession was the worst recession in US history since the Great Depression. We had unemployment of over 10%. I mean, we had a very brief uptick in unemployment during COVID, but it was very brief. The 1980s recession was the worst downturn in the US economy since the Great Depression, and that was partly because inflation expectations had gotten so high, we really had to slam on the brakes to get inflation back down. And we don't want to get to that situation. Oh, God. The federal funds rate was up 15 to 20%. Some of these rates were like 15, 20%. So the plan is not to go to, I mean, if you look at where the FOMC projects interest rates is going, we're talking about 5%, something like that, and keeping it at that level. And that ought to be enough to get inflation down to the target over the next couple of years. But again, this thing about expectations is really key. And that's what we really want to make sure people they believe that we're serious about getting inflation back to 2% and continue to expect that to be the long run norm.
Yes, sir. In the name of quantitative easing, the Fed has bought corporate bonds, and they bought stocks, and they have bought treasury bonds and bills. And I understand that the Fed balance sheet is like $8 to $9 trillion. Yes. Does the Fed have a policy or a plan to reduce its own balance sheet, its own debt?
Yes. And
secondly, has that caused a bubble in the stock market or in the bond market?
So yes, so during the pandemic, so the first big increase in the balance sheet took place during the global financial crisis, and we went into the reasons for why it happened. It was deemed necessary to try to stabilize the economy, and then during the pandemic it was pumped up again. It's peaked and it's now actually been run off. It's not talked about a lot, but if you look at the FOMC statements, they say we'll continue to run off. I can't remember, it's 50 billion a month or something like that. But it's steadily declining, and there's a plan to keep bringing it down until it gets to a level consistent with the new operating framework. So it is being run off, but we're doing it in the background, in part because we're not fully sure we fully understand exactly how the balance sheet affects the economy, either on the way up or the way down. We want people to stay focused on interest rates, and that's our main tool. So just as pumping up the balance sheet during the crisis provided monetary stimulus, running it down now is sort of removing some stimulus from the economy. And the projections are about, if you run this down by about 2.5 trillion, it's about equivalent to a 50 basis point increase in interest rates. But it's ongoing, and there's an announced plan, which you can find on the FOMC website, to actually keep running it off until it gets to a level consistent with the new ample reserves regime.
Oh yeah, Tom gets the last question.
So some of this is an observation, some of this is a rant. I just want your opinion. I was having a conversation recently with a young man who is very interested in politics, and he said he's a fan of low government spending, small government. Everybody remember that term, small government? Last time I checked, the federal government was like 25% of the GDP. What I find interesting about this is, we're talking about tweaks and hard assets and all that stuff, but I don't hear a lot of conversation about reining in the biggest spender of all. So I know you guys don't have the control to do that. I guess, as you said earlier, we who vote have the ability to do that. Yet what we see is people who go in and say one thing when they're running, do something the opposite when they're in office. So that's my rant. I also want to say that long range, we forget as a group, these low interest rates since 08, 09 really are an aberration. Yeah. I mean, I bought a house in '84, the prevailing rate was 14.5%. Anybody remember that? Like most people in the room? So we're talking tweaks here of a quarter or a half a basis point when the reality is we still got it really good. Yep. And I think what you guys are doing, if anything, is igniting a fire under our economy that is why we're leading the world. I mean, is that what we're trying to do based on our Fed policy?
So what we're really trying to do is just get inflation back down to the level consistent with price stability. We are in a somewhat stronger position than most other countries for all kinds of reasons having to do with our level of productivity. Our productivity may not be growing a lot, but we have a very high level of productivity and a whole bunch of other things going for us too. But a lot of this stuff, I mean, it was created by men or institutions. It can be destroyed by institutions. So like reckless fiscal spending, eventually you get to a point where you've lost a lot of capacity to respond to crises, and people begin to doubt your willingness to repay. I mean, the whole small government thing is ultimately a political decision. The biggest spending programs are the social programs, and nobody wants to cut the social programs, right? Like Medicare, Social Security. These are very hard things to dial back on.
When I started working, the cutoff on Social Security withholding was like $36,000.
Yeah.
Now it's 140 something. Big surprise. It's going to keep going up.
Yep.
It has to.
But yeah, I mean, the size of government, though, it's ultimately determined by us as voters, by the people we send to Washington. And the Fed, really, we just take whatever the facts are out there and then try to set monetary policy appropriately.
Mark, thank you so much for being here. A book will be placed in your honor at the McSHAN Elementary Library for speaking today. Thank you. Next Friday, we will be here at MAGGIANO'S. BURK, MURCHISON, and Michael GRANBERRY, authors of a book called Hole in the Roof. Herb Hammond will be our chair. At this time, Mary Ann, would you come up and lead us in a four-way test? She says, if I can get there. Thank you. You can lower that mic.
Would you all join me in the 4-weight test? First, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build and better friendships? Fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Ring the bell.
Do I hit it?
There you go. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Do they have a rendition yet of what this is going to look like?
No, I haven't seen it. He's meeting with construction election next week.
Yeah.
He did say if you want kind of an idea, you go to their Willow Bend location.
Oh, okay.
It's just kind of more contemporary. Get all the wood paneling and all that.
Chandeliers probably go away.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah. All right.
Run around. Hey, Richard.